All right, we are live and welcome to the Homelab Show episode 130, Portainer. And I see questions in there asking why we were late. Hey, Jay, how's audio?
Yeah. Yeah. So the problem's me. I have audio issues. I have my recording system completely tuned. However, it doesn't work over USB in the same way. So I kind of had to do a pass through and some shenanigans. So hopefully it sounds decent enough. So apologies for that.
I told Jay he's
But
got to do what I do. I just get that Blue Yeti plugged in right to the computer. My recording audio for my inputs are different than my audio that I do for live streams. It is a different mic, but the Blue Yeti is one of those, it just works things.
yeah, I think for me, I just want one system for everything. And I know I can do it. It's just that I had the
Well,
cable in the wrong place and didn't test it properly. But I do feel strongly that we won't have this problem
all right. That's the part that matters. We're going to be talking
again.
about Portainer today. It is probably the easiest web UI for managing Docker. Would that could be a pretty good way to describe it, Jay?
I would say so. Containers can be kind of like overwhelming for someone who doesn't know the technology yet. I mean, it's already a different way of doing everything. But the whole point of container orchestration and managing containers and lifecycle and things like that is a whole nother layer. And it's very complicated, especially when you look at Kubernetes, which I'm a fan of. And there's nothing wrong with Kubernetes, especially if you want to get certified. It's a great thing to learn. But sometimes you just don't need that complexity. We have a lot of people in our audience that are using, TrueNAS and Synology and things like that to run their containers. So there is definitely a an audience for people that just want a more. It's not completely turnkey, but Portainer is probably the most turnkey and the easiest solution, at least that I've found, for someone that wants container orchestration without a degree in computer science.
Yeah, the one of the things, and I think we started talking about this last night when we were going over some of the notes. One of the interesting things about Portainer is it doesn't just allow you to run it on a single machine. There's connectors to allow other machines to connect to it. So you can have one main Portainer system that's kind of a central management for some of your other Docker containers on there. One of the things it helps me a lot with, and we'll cover this as we go through, but the understanding the Docker networking, which I'm just not an expert at. Like, I understand how it works functionally. It's the commands and setting it up can be a little bit tricky because some of their terminology of like Mac VLAN is a little bit different than what you might think. You think of Mac. I thought Mac address in VLAN, but it's a little different on there. So yeah.
Yep, and I just put out a video about this too, so I just wanted to plug that. Very recently. I think it's my most recent upload. Um, So if anyone wants to see how you set it up, you can watch the video. But just taking it from the very beginning, what is Portainer? So it's a container orchestration solution, and it's like I was mentioning, a lot easier than Kubernetes when it comes to this. But by container orchestration, what I mean is you don't want to have a situation where you have a container that you have to babysit. You want something to run. Maybe you might want it to be automatically recreated if something happens and the container goes down, it'll recreate it. Those kinds of things. We want to manage containers or have we could do it ourselves by just running Docker commands on the command line, but container orchestration gives you a management layer on top of it. I think that's really important. But when it comes to Kubernetes, everything is, set up via the command line. Not that you don't have to use a command line for this, but it's just a level higher. But when it comes to Portainer, all you really have to do is set up Docker and run the Portainer container, and it's pretty much that simple. The setup is very easy to do, and one of the things that I like about it is it gives you a better visualization on how containers work, like we were talking about last night. If you're new to this technology, and just like you were saying, you don't understand the networking and things like that, especially volumes, attaching a volume to a container, where is that volume going to be stored? You could visualize those things better because it's in the UI. So you can see your volumes, you can see your networks, and I think it kind of gives you an edge on learning containerization, even if that wasn't your original goal.
Yeah, and a lot of it comes down to Homelab use. We may not be on the roadmap to say, hey, I want to be someone who runs Docker every day. I want
Right.
to learn this as something I'm going to have for a job skill. So you want something that is easy to maintain so you don't have to remember every single Docker command. Because a lot of times, especially in the Homelab, you're setting it up, you're going, cool, I found these cool services that work for me. and that's it. Like these 5 services I run or whatever those nodes are, and you may not go in and address them very often. And Docker can be a little bit daunting. I mean, unless you take really good notes, which me and Jay have definitely preached, but we know the reality of it. You're looking for an
Right.
easy UI to be able to update and change things and understand the configured network, and that's where Portainer comes in to make that a whole lot easier.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to use, like I was saying, to the point where I didn't really know how to use it at first, but I found out how to use it really quickly because everything seems to be in a logical place. The UI is just, I think it's really well done. I think it's something that a lot of people should try out, especially if they're on the fence when it comes to containers. If you could spare a virtual machine, install Docker on it, and install Portainer, I think that is definitely a major benefit. And there's features like being able to create YAML files. So presumably, I haven't tried it yet, but I know you could probably Ansible the heck out of it in that case. Just YAML files are, given in Ansible. But that being said, having this visualization on your containers and being able to manage it easier, I think is the main goal. But I think another aspect of it is that it goes way beyond that. I mean, if you just want a single Portainer server, that's fine. Maybe that's all you need. But as we were discussing last night, I forgot what you called it. I didn't even know about this feature. You can have nodes, I think you called it.
Yeah. You can have
So
your
how does
main Portainer, and then you can have other ones attached to it.
Right. So for managing different, setups on Portainer, you can have more than one. Being able to switch between them is very useful as well. So on my end, I haven't started using it in production. It's kind of one of those situations where I have Kubernetes, so I kind of wish that I discovered this before. But then again, given what I do, Kubernetes is a better fit for me because I like the complicated stuff. But I think it's pretty amazing that we have something like this for people that just want something that's more turnkey. And another thing that I feel about this is I know this is not going to be a popular opinion, so I will absolutely accept any flames or anything that are coming my way. I just don't feel like containers really have a place on network attached storage. I feel like that's just not something they should be doing. Now, granted, I think for our audience, we have a lot of people that can't afford multiple servers. So obviously, there's a lot of people that have no other option. But the problem that I have with this is that, this isn't really their number one focus. Synology, their focus is network attached storage, obviously. But they add this feature on top. And then you have TrueNAS Scale, which is adding this feature on top. I think there's something to be said about Portainer being a separate solution that's dedicated to what it does, where you have the NAS dedicated to storage, you have Portainer dedicated to containers. That natural separation works because I sometimes find issue with how you have tens of thousands of containers. How are you going to manage getting and testing each one of those on your NAS? Or are you just going to restrict people to certain ones that they've tested, which would be an okay way to do it. But when you have something like Portainer, I mean, it's literally what it does. This is what it does. So I would even argue it might even be better to set up a virtual machine on a NAS if you only have a NAS and install Portainer in that VM and then do it that way. And maybe
The
that'll even be fine.
The one counter argument I will have in something I run a lot of is they containerized is I think this is a great way to do it when you're talking about an appliance like TrueNAS specifically. They did containerize MinIO. The nice thing about doing MinIO and rsync, probably less issues with rsync, but certainly there's been numerous problems with MinIO because you're talking about S3 object storage. So it's running right where your NAS is. It's storing the objects right where your NAS is. So you have that nice access. You're not really moving it to a separate VM that also has to connect to that NAS. And it makes it easy to update without updating the appliance. I don't have to restart the appliance. I can say, oh, there's a new, let's do a Docker poll. We're going to grab the newest version of MinIO because there's been a vulnerability or a bug found in it. So I can quickly update those. So there's some apps I think lend themselves, even in production environments, not just server consolidation environments, to running them on a NAS where it makes sense. I'll throw sync thing in there.
Yeah, I was just about to mention sync thing because
Yeah,
that's to
it
your
makes sense on
point.
my NAS.
I think you have a really good point. There's going to be some things that are, naturally going to fit just because storage is at the, core of what the app does. Like Nextcloud, for example, I could throw that in there. If you have Nextcloud or syncing your files, it does make sense to have that right where your files happen to be. It also makes sense to have Plex because most likely your movie collection is probably on your NAS, and that's a good place to have it too. So I can see definitely there's some
Yeah, there's
situations
some
where
use
this would
cases.
work.
Yeah.
But it's just like when you have tens of thousands of containers that are all created differently, they can all change at the same time or anytime, and then you could have, library poisoning and all these other things. It just, I mean, I'm not saying they can't do it. It's just a lot to keep up with on top of also developing a NAS. Whereas Portainer, again, that's what they do. So, and by no means am I going to say Portainer is perfect. All software has flaws, but again, sometimes if you can silo these things, I think it's a good idea. But then again, I started just like everyone else with a single server to my name, and that's all I could afford. So I know how it goes.
Yeah, you put everything on that one server. We
I
get it.
sure did.
We
Yeah, I sure did.
it's a great learning experiment.
Yep,
It's the because you learn about all kinds of fun stuff and what does or doesn't work when you stick it all on one server. So I still encourage people to do it as a learning experiment, but you'll learn in larger scale production systems. You'll probably change that. So
absolutely, absolutely. So Portainer is definitely something I want to do some advanced videos on. On my end, I think, Tom, you've been using it a little bit longer than me. I'm kind
yeah,
of like with the video that I've done, that's pretty much where I left off. And I'm thinking about just deploying it for something because it's one of those solutions I think is, I should use it for something because I like it. And then maybe that'll help me create advanced tutorials because once I get into something, you know how it goes. We get into
yeah.
something and then next thing you know, there's about 10 videos about it.
Now I don't know the answer to this, but do you? Will Portainer work with Podman? I seen that question come up.
I don't know. That's a really good question. I didn't even think about it, and I should have because I know Podman is a better way forward. I guess I'll have to say I don't know. I followed their official instructions, which said to install Docker. They were very careful to let you know that you should not be using the snap version of Docker. I don't know why, but according to the project, that's not going to work. So they walk you through installing Docker via the official Docker repository, and then once you do that, you install it. But I probably should have looked at that because that's normally
It
something I
looks
do.
like it does. There's a I found a write up really quick how to do it. We probably should have looked
Very
at it
good.
before the show. You're right. I don't. One
Yeah.
day I'll switch to Podman. I'm just out of habit. Apt-get install Docker and things are in Docker, and I know Podman has compatibility with Docker commands. I just haven't really taken the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of features that we can mention about Portainer beyond, the core of it runs containers, right? I mean, volumes, containers, networking. Going through some of the features, there's and it's kind of interesting because I think there's probably a paid version, so I think that they're kind of trying to upsell me here. But one of the things that we could do is manage where the volumes are stored, which I think is really important because um, this is a pet peeve of mine that people don't know where their data is, and this happens too often. They have a container and they create like a storage volume for it, and then the storage volume goes away. Well, where was it? They didn't even know where it was in the first place to back it up. It's kind of one of those things where we really do need to have eyes on this. And with Portainer, being able to configure where our volumes are stored, which volume is attached to which container, I think that kind of might help data responsibility a bit because when something works too well, it's kind of easy to take it for granted, and then you don't know what's going on in the back end. And I think you mentioned a few times having people that lost their Docker volume and they didn't ever even bother to back it up, which is
Yeah, to
not
kind of
cool.
give an a little bit of background for those that haven't used Portainer, the things you get is you're going to get a dashboard, so you can actually start. It's reading from the standard command line, so you can start your containers from the command line, and then it goes, "Hey, look, I see these. I'm going to take control over this," and you're going to be able to see the volumes created, and the networks created, and the images and the containers. And if you're using like the Docker Compose, the stacks as they call it, I wish they had the same naming of stacks versus compose because they're very similar because you can put a compose file in there, but there's a little modification you do, correct?
Yeah. I believe there is. I'm not really sure about some of the other features on there, but running containers is fairly straightforward. I wanted to bring up this comment real quick. Someone asked, sorry, wrong mouse. How do you back up containers in Portainer? And I wanted to bring this up because I'm going to go a different direction with this. I think backing up a container is probably not the right approach. Backing up the data of the container, yes.
Right.
The file that you use to create the container, if you used a YAML file, yes. For example, if you're doing containers right, your container should be disposable. You should be able to just lose it. It gets deleted. It doesn't matter because your configuration and your data are stored somewhere else. So with a container, It's more or less you have the application and that's it. And the application is managed inside the container. Then you have the data that's outside of the container. And you don't have to have containers to do data separation. You can make a virtual machine disposable by putting its data on block storage on another volume, for example. But with containers, it really lends itself well to this. So if a container dies, and then especially with Portainer, if you have it set to automatically recreate the container again, then the data was not changed at any point during this process. So everything should be like it, never had an issue to begin with. Obviously, you need to find out why the container failed. But when we start to think of the application instance and the data as being two separate entities, I think that is probably the better way to do it. Is there a way to back up a container? Probably. I just never looked into it because that's not
Yeah,
really
you want to
something
focus on
Yeah,
backing up the volume of it.
right.
And that's actually something you can do in Portainer. You can actually choose to use like an NFS volume. So you can create the volume you need in an NFS store, maybe an NFS store on your NAS. So now you know where your data is and you have the YAML file that built your Docker container. And then you combine that knowledge together to go, cool. All I know is this is the YAML file I need. And this points it here, and I'm having it mount this NFS volume that I configured inside of there, because it's not that you can't configure Docker from the command line to mount NFS for storage, but there's more steps versus Portainer is
Sure.
just like a little checkbox of, save this here. And it's a nice feature because then you know where your data is. It's backed up on your NAS.
Yep.
You're doing whatever steps there for the data. And then anytime you rebuild it, you just repoint it at that. Then you can just do the Docker pull, grab the latest version, and restart it, and away you go.
Yep, absolutely. And think about versioned or snapshots, I meant to say, in TrueNAS. You could have snapshots of this volume. And if you mess something up in the configuration, all you have to do is just revert the snapshot. And then assuming you have a snapshot that has individual, that per container. But if you had one for all, then you could at least back up all the individual volumes and back up any or restore any one of them. But having versioned backups with your container solution, it just opens up a lot of possibilities. There's a lot of resiliency with that. There's stateful storage where you can go back to a previous snapshot. You can revert a snapshot, and also do scrubbing, which is really important because the last thing you want to do is go through each of your 10,000 photos or however many you have and make sure none of them are corrupted. Nobody has time for that. So having having an NFS store with scrubbing on it, even going that direction, which is closer to how I do here, will give you some of the benefits of ZFS behind your storage for your containers. So I think when you really kind of look at all the different features of the things that are underneath your applications, you'll start to kind of see some things that you might not think of at first. Like my whole sync thing for RetroPie for Super Nintendo save files, for example. There's just no limit to what you could do. But when you have the mindset changed, I think it's important to change the mindset of the containers. It's not like Lex C containers, which are stateful, which you probably do want to back up and are the virtual machine approach to containers. Most of the time, the idea is your containers are cattle, not pets.
Yeah. Now, something worth noting, and this is not directly related to Portainer, but it can be very helpful running it in Portainer and then looking at all the other outputs. Dazzle is a really great thing for looking up all your logs. It's a real-time log viewer for all of your Docker things. So you can say, all right, here's all the things that are going on in Docker. One of them seems to have some problem. Dazzle will give you all those real-time logs and let you look at all the current running containers on there. So I kind of use the combination of those things to figure out why something isn't doing what I expect it to do. Because it's great when you Docker compose, and it seems the majority of the time it works fine. On occasion it doesn't, and it's like you got to try and figure out, okay, I reattach it to this data store. Why doesn't it reattach? Oh, the database isn't starting because it needs some type of upgrade to the database, or it found
Right.
some unexpected formatting that there's an upgrade for. This is probably more akin to problems you'll run into in Nextcloud and larger projects.
Yeah.
I just helped someone with a similar issue to that, where all we had to do is run, I think it's the OCC and one of the upgrade commands inside of one of the containers. And then from there, it upgraded the database to the new version that solved the problem. So there's
Yeah.
definitely some combinations of things you can do in there to make that work.
Yeah, the OCC problem, I think I ran into that too,
Yeah.
as a matter of fact. I
And
think that was kinda like after setup, it just they didn't want it part of the setup process. I think it's kind of
But
part of the setup right now, obviously,
Well,
or
it
obviously.
happens in the updates. If an update doesn't go successfully when you do a version update and it re-updates the database schema, I think was the part that they failed on theirs. You can just rerun it and say, "Hey, reapply this database schema update to fix that."
Yep. Yep, definitely.
Have you used Dockage at all? I've used it. I don't know if you've used it, Jay.
I have not. Yeah. So one thing I will mention is that at some point in the future, there's going to be a greater focus on containers on my channel, because there's all these different things that I haven't tried yet, and that's definitely one of them. And then it's kind of looking at the overall landscape and seeing what to cover. Obviously, Kubernetes being one, but I haven't used that one yet. But I can't wait to dive into this. So if anyone has feedback as far as what I should cover, what I should try that's container centric, then drop us a line and let me know, because I'm not saying I'll do a video on anything. I'm not promising anything, but you never know. I mean, all it takes is one person to mention one thing and I get obsessed with it, and then there's a video. So
Yeah. Kind of coming back quickly to Dockage, there's a couple of videos. What's our friend's name that does videos on it? If you type in Dockage, he's one of the first people to do videos on it. But Dockage is pretty cool. It's by the same person that did Uptime Kuma. Dockage is a lot simpler than Portainer. Portainer has a lot more features than Dockage. Dockage is
Mhm.
built around the same concept Uptime Kuma is, of course, being the same author, of just basic features and simplicity. I don't have any problem using it. It seems like a pretty cool project. DB Tech, yes.
Yep.
He's done some great videos on it. His
Yeah,
name was
great
on the
guy.
tip of my tongue. He's a friend of mine as well. So a
Yep.
friend of me and Jay's and our group of YouTube tech people we know. He's got a few videos on it, so definitely go check those out. Maybe I'll do a video on Dockage as well. I've debated about diving deeper into it. I set it up and used it. I don't use it in any of my ongoing systems, mostly because it didn't do enough over Portainer, but I thought about using it because it's simpler in Portainer and I don't use all the features in Portainer. So I was like, maybe Dockage. But honestly, if you want to get real to the nitty gritty, production things for the business are all run with Docker command line. I don't have Portainer on any of those. So
Oh, right.
yeah, I have it for like what I call my personal things that I play with all the time. That aren't really for business. Like I look at what's in my Portainer right now, and it's like there's a guacamole image I was playing with, a couple different document tools. For one's called Flat Notes, another one's called Hedge Doc. This is when we were testing all those different note taking apps. So
Yeah,
I
I
also
remember
have
that.
Chasm running in there, but I don't run Chasm in production anywhere. So it's kind of like it's novel and it runs in there.
Yeah, Chasm
Oh
could be a good solution for people that are running on a Raspberry Pi and then they have a server with lots of memory. Then you could just have a browser running
yeah,
from the server and not worry about the memory constraint on your Raspberry Pi because everything's running off the server. So that's another good one.
yeah. I
And
think
we
someone
talked about that
mentioned
in Benefits.
Christian Lempa did a video on Dockage as well. So he's another great channel to check out. So one of the things, if you look on my site, I have a list of creators on there. They're creators that I trust to put out good, valuable content. That I personally know most of the creators on that list. So if you check that out, it's I keep that list up to date for a lot of other tech channels that are specifically ones that I know are not going to lead you astray in terms of telling you tech done wrong.
Right, right. No, absolutely. Yeah, the League of Extraordinary YouTubers or whatever we want to call it.
Yep.
Something like that, the secret group. So,
Yeah. One more question before we
yeah.
wrap this up shortly here is someone says, why use Docker over LXC? And I think that's kind of an easy answer. My answer is really, I mean, LXC container and building it all is fun if you're familiar with doing it, but grabbing just a YAML file and instantly having full guacamole set up or a Nextcloud instance set up off of one YAML file or Graylog, something I use in production, I think is a lot easier than building. I don't know what challenges I'd run into building Graylog in an LXC container.
Well, I think that whatever one you use depends on the project, I think is the best way to put it. They're both containers, but they solve everything differently. So
Right.
I would argue that there's a lot of value in building your container images, regardless of whether it's Lexi or Docker yourself, because then you know what's in it and you can maintain it. Obviously, not everybody has the time to do that. You could check, if you want to run Nginx, maybe you'll just run an Nginx container from Nginx, which is reasonably trustworthy. So I do get the ease of use there. I always like to build everything manually, so I don't have to worry about poisoning or my registry getting taken over or something like that. If you're to take that out of the equation, though, I think what it comes down to is whether you prefer the virtual machine approach to containers or the container approach to containers. And I hate to say that because Lexi came before Docker, but the idea being Docker containers, everything is a layer. So you do an apt update or apt dist upgrade, for example, in an Ubuntu container, and install all the updates. You create a new layer. You install Apache. You created another layer, and that's part of the charm of Docker, that whole system. But then with Lexi, you don't have that. You have, I mean, you look at a console on Proxmox, for example, you're going to see a login prompt, just like you'd see with a virtual machine that you're running. You log into it like a virtual machine. You create users like a virtual machine. You install updates, and it's so I think it depends on which one you prefer, and I recommend everyone tries both. Honestly, if you're wondering which one you should use, run them both and just compare and contrast,
Yeah.
because that's part of what the charm of Homelab is. That's what we do, right? We spin up an application. We might love it. We might keep it in our stack. We might not like it. We might delete it and run something else. Trying different things is really the superpower of this. And if you have the capability of creating another virtual machine, I would say just, or in this case, a container, then just give it a shot.
Yeah. I see someone ask this question. This comes up a lot about running UniFi and Docker. The I finally, if I'm not mistaken, it's finally supported by the Linux server IO people, which does help because before it was like one individual doing it. And the question I always came because, by the way, there's no official Docker support from UniFi. So because there's no official Docker support, and UniFi is something that runs, the networking infrastructure of you as a home labber, or in my case, the business infrastructure that we run with it. I don't trust third parties. I don't want more pieces in my chain in a supply chain by which I get this. So I'm always careful to recommend using Docker. Now, it seems to be from a better source now, but you're still adding layers into the supply chain, which any layer in there is also part of your trust circle. So you're
Right.
trusting UniFi to have good software. Then you're trusting someone to package it well in Docker, a third party, then hand it over to you. So my opinion is I run it because it's easy to do. I've got a video called How to Set Up UniFi Controller in 5 minutes, and it can, if you follow and copy paste the commands, you can have a UniFi controller in a VM in under 5 minutes. It
Mhm.
pulls everything directly from UniFi. Now, the script this third party is putting together, but the third party script that puts it together is from a UniFi employee unofficially. So that is a little bit of a gray area. But even if you wanted to load it manually, it's not that hard to set up. You can follow through what the script does. It's very transparent. But when you talk about service delivery via package container, you are now adding each person that does that packaging to the trust chain of the software that's getting onto your system. So yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing you could do is just have a virtual machine on your laptop outside of your hypervisor solution, and just start it when you want to change settings on UniFi. Shut it down when you're done with it. That way, if the
Yeah.
worst thing happens is someone breaks into your Proxmox where you might have ran your UniFi controller, they won't find it there, and it's not even running or listening for connections or anything. It's just not even on until you turn it on to go make changes and then shut it off when you're done. Sure, there's going to be some downsides to that. There's going to be some features that won't work the same, but
Yeah.
I think that's a secure way of running it that way. Because if you install a Debian virtual machine and just install the Debian repository, it's pretty quick to do, and you don't have the threat service that comes with keeping something on all the time.
Right. All right. Anything
Yeah.
else we have to add for the Portainer side of this and Docker side?
No, it was it's an easy topic, and it also kind of made the video uncomfortable because at one point I'm like, I should probably find more to do in this video because it literally takes longer to install Docker than it does to install Portainer.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it goes. But check out the video, and hopefully, if you wanted to walk through, that'll give you what you need.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us for this Homeland episode 130. Check out Jay's video on learnlinux.tv. You'll find his video on the walkthrough of it, the tutorial side of this, not the podcast side of it. Thanks for joining, and see y'all next time.
See ya.